our next presentation is from Rhia Gibbs, who is the founder of Black Teachers Connect. Lovely to see you. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
So I'm going to whisk away and leave it to the presentation. I'm really good, darling, but I'm conscious that I've made us run over. So I'm going to disappear, let you do your presentation, and I'll come back for the Q&A shortly.
Okay, no problem. Okay, good morning, everyone. As Hannah said, my name is Rhia Gibbs. I am the founder and director of Black Teachers Connect. I am also a teacher of sociology and criminology at a girls' school in South London, and I'm a middle leader. I'm head of year 12 as well. So my day-to-day is pretty busy, and I'm here doing a talk on just stop talking representation and start doing representation. So as I just said, all about me, I'm the founder of Black Teachers Connect, head of year 12, and I also teach sociology and criminology. Now, what does representation mean? I think we've been hearing this term a lot recently. People have been speaking about representation, and it means to include different types of people, for example, in film, politics, sport, education, where different groups of people are represented. Now, I think the term itself has been slightly watered down, and we've been getting it confused with talking about it instead of actually doing representation. Now, I want you to take a moment and think about, what do you actually represent? Who do you represent? I know for my students, I represent a Black woman, a Black working class woman who has grown up in South London for her whole life, who now teaches in South London. And I represent that image for my students. I also represent academic excellence. I studied at a Russell Group University. I left university with a 2-1 degree in sociology. And I represent all of these things for my students. It's so important to understand who you represent and who you are and what you are doing for your students in the education system. And it's important that we aren't just talking about representation, but we are actually doing it. And that will be my underlying message for today's presentation. So the year of 2020 is really important for me. It's really important for you to understand the context behind 2020. So it was, of course, the year that George Floyd was killed. And I feel like there's become an obsession with terms like diversity and equality. Now, the work I've been doing with Black Teachers Connect started in 2018. So this was way before George Floyd was killed. Of course, things were happening in regards to the Black Lives Matter movement. But I didn't get a starting point from George Floyd being killed. But discussions around diversity and equality started to rise a lot more after that happened. And I'm asking today, is that behind a tokenism, or is that behind real change? A lot of schools made a commitment, made a pledge at that point in time to say, we've got to change our curriculums, we've got to make it more diverse for our students. That's absolutely fine. But have those conversations amounted to real change today? That is something to ask yourself. The conversations you had almost 2 years ago, can you see where your institution has changed itself from then till now? And I'm an advocate for conversations. Do not get me wrong. I'm an advocate for people discussing representation, discussing equality. But how long can you have a conversation for? How long until you really need to make actual change? And so are the movements we see, and are they tokenistic? Do they last for a short amount of time? Or are they real long-term change where we can see these changes happening in 10 years' time? Will we be able to look back and actually reflect on these things? So why does talking change nothing? Well, I'm in the midst of a revision period with my year 13 students who are about to go on to do their exams. And I often tell them to stop telling me they're going to do revision and just go and do it. They're constantly saying to me, Miss, I'm going to get it done. I'm going to get it done. But do they actually do it? That's something that I challenge them on. Talking changes nothing in the retrospect of things. Talking brings an awareness, and that's absolutely fine. But if we aren't going to do anything to change that, there is absolutely no point. Real representation changed my life. So I went to a sixth form college in Clapham South. I went to SFX, and it's predominantly a Black sixth form. And I was taught by a woman named Alexandra Carter. She was my sociology teacher. She was a Black woman. She changed the face of education for me. And without seeing her teaching me sociology, I do not think I'd be sitting here in front of you today talking about something I'm so passionate about. Without seeing her doing what she did in the classroom, making me believe that I can actually be academically successful, I do not think I would be a teacher today. Without her, I wouldn't have been able to see that I would have been able to achieve that very thing that she showed me. Real representation changes lives. When my students see me on a day-to-day, I change their life. As they see me progressing in school, they've seen me coming as a teacher trainee, they've seen me move up into a middle leadership position. That gives them hope, and it gives them an awareness that they can also move up too. So they can actually see me doing something in my school. I don't just talk about representation, but I am doing it. And so action over pledges. It's so fine to do pledges. It's absolutely fine to pledge to do something, but will you actually take action? What pledges did you make in 2020 that need to be changed now? In 2020, I pledged to ensure that I would support Black teachers to my very, very best. And today in Black Teachers Connect, we have a mentorship scheme where our early career Black teachers are being mentored by senior leaders and head teachers that have been in the system for so long. And it is important to do things when there is a commitment to it. Do not just do things in a haste. I've seen a lot of schools rushing to change the curriculum without any real thought behind it. What will this curriculum look like in 5 years' time or in 10 years' time? What will our staff body look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? And when you're changing your staff body, when you're changing your curriculum, are you also embedding equity into that? It's fine to hire 1 million Black staff, but will those Black staff be given the same opportunities as your white staff do? Representation should not be a tick box exercise, but it can change the trajectory of a child's life. We shouldn't underestimate this term, and we should make sure that we actually give our all to it. We must give a commitment to ensuring that representation is a core part of the education system. So what does action look like? Action starts off with investment. It starts off with asking yourself, how much are you willing to put into this change? And I'm not just talking about money. It doesn't equate with money, because schools have money. They can invest into things. It's about time. It's about dedication. How much time are you willing to invest into what representation looks like in your school, into what equality looks like in your school? Are you willing to bring in outside organizations? Are you willing to invest your time and hold up your hands and say, we've got it wrong here for the past 5 years, we're willing to make a change? You must commit to that change. It isn't a one-off commitment. Now, when I am doing talks with schools, I do not allow them to do a one-off session with us. If a school wants one-off session of unconscious bias or racism, we do not allow that. We want long-term change for students and staff. And so that means giving it a commitment over a long term rather than short-term fixes. So if you're going to change the curriculum, it needs to be over the long term, not just for year 7, but 8, 9, 10, 11, and sixth form. It can't be a short-term fix. You can't just hire a Black teacher and say, woohoo, we have representation. What is that Black teacher doing in your school? How are they supported? Do they feel like a part of your community? How are they being helped to move up and grow in their positions? Challenge, call out, and change. Challenge the things that you see in your school, even if that's within yourself. Call out what is going wrong and commit to that long-term change. It is so important. And so I'm asking you today to not to stop having conversations about representation, but to start actually committing to action. It's so important, and I can't wait to see what you implement in your institutions. So how can you connect with me? You can connect with us via Twitter, Black Teachers Connect. My Twitter is at loveree with __, or on Instagram. And if you scan the QR code, you can see our newsletter. You can get access to all of our events and so much more. So what I'll leave you with today is to stop having these conversations and start putting in real action for real change to change the education system forever.
Rhia, I'm loving the accountability you bring, because you're absolutely right. We need to start talking about it and actually doing it. And I think one of the things we keep challenging is allyship and performative allyship, and whether people are tweeting about it or actually like bringing that challenge to conversations in the actual school environment. What are some of your tips to the audience who want to be committed and want to be active, but perhaps don't know where to start?
I think it's important to kind of stop, and you just said it, stop kind of looking online and start looking at your own institution. So when you go into school, is there something that you feel as though you could potentially challenge in that moment? Is there something that you could potentially call out? And it doesn't have to be in a way where you are being kind of aggressive with it, or you're kind of challenging your school in a really bad way, but start that conversation and think about how can we make one step towards change. I always say to schools that I work with or school leaders, it's small steps, and small steps are really important. So what's something that you can do in your classroom to challenge stuff, to make sure you're bringing representation for your students? Does that start with what your resources look like? Does that start with what your discussions are around? It's important to kind of start with ourselves and then move on to the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And then that holding others to account. So when you are in a staff meeting or a department meeting or just in the staff room and you perhaps hear something that does need addressing, like how do you find the confidence sometimes to do that? Because I think confidence comes up quite a lot of the time that people don't know what to say or how to say it or how it's going to land.
It can be very difficult, especially for our Black and BAME teachers who are the only teacher of color in their environment. And if they hear something that they're not too sure about speaking about and they don't know how to challenge it, I think just kind of intercepting and thinking, oh, so what, so why do you think that? Where has that kind of come from? And maybe just have a conversation about your own experiences, because I think that brings an understanding to things, linked to outside experiences that you've also had in the education system. But I think your school has to be in a place where they're ready to have these conversations. But that doesn't start with you as a teacher just doing that. I think it starts with you also speaking to your senior leaders and your head teachers about where they're going with these conversations. I've had conversations with my head teacher about this, and we know it's going to be long-term change. It's not going to happen overnight, but there has to be a commitment across your school. But it can be so difficult when you are the only Black teacher. And seek advice from other educators. We are your allies outside of school, and we can kind of give you that support as well.
I completely agree with you about this being long-term change or long-term transformation, and the fear we collectively have about people running at it too fast and it being too tokenistic and too surface level. How do we balance that? How do we balance the kind of the commitment to getting it right over time with the articulation of it? Because there can be a frustration, can't there, from the staff or from the parent body who don't think anything's happening. How do we get that balance?
I think it's important to reflect on whether you are being proactive or reactive. So if you are in a situation where something happens in your school, let's say a racist incident, and then you think from that point onwards, well, let's do an assembly about race, or let's do an assembly about Black Lives Matter, that seems very reactive. And so for the students, that can seem like, well, they're only doing it because of X, Y, and Z. So it's important to be proactive with that long-term change. It's important to sit down with your staff first and foremost and your students. I suggest things like small focus groups, anonymous questionnaires, see where things are kind of going wrong and start to think about where you can make that small term change first. It's important to not look tokenistic through not being reactive to things. And the schools that are reactive often do kind of get it wrong with that tokenism that they implement into their system.
Absolutely. And you've kind of half answered this question, but I'm going to give it to you anyway from someone in the audience. Like, what are some of the simple, practical next steps for schools to move from talking to doing? Because the conversation is important. We do need the focus groups. We do need the listening spaces. We do need the surveys. But how do we then convert that from talking into actual action?
All staff need to have a reflection. They need to look at themselves and look at what they're doing in their classrooms. I think you should start very much by looking at the policies and practices that you have in place. So what CPD have you got at the moment for staff of color, for example? What do they have that's different? What opportunities do they have that's different from the rest of the staff body? Start to implement those things, even if it's a small reading each week, if it's something every month, even if it's a focus group or a support group every month, put something into place. Now, when it comes to recruitment, that's a little bit more difficult. And I think a lot of staff and a lot of school leaders say, well, nobody applies for these jobs. start by coming onto platforms like Twitter, like Instagram. You can start by that. We are looking to diversify our workforce. We are looking to diversify our teaching groups. So reach out to organizations like myself, like yours, and start to ask those questions and start to think about how you can take those actions, and we will support you with that. But there's no point just thinking that it's going to happen overnight, because it won't.
And I loved your anecdote that we hold our students accountable all the time. That conversation with your sixth form, but stop telling me you're going to revise, just go and actually do it. Like, I think we do have the confidence, the empowerment to hold the students to account, and we just need to perhaps practice that behaviour with our colleagues and our seniors maybe as well.
Absolutely. I think as teachers, we often tell our students stuff, but we don't even give ourselves the same grace. We say, oh, you can make mistakes, but we don't give ourselves the opportunity to make mistakes. We tell our students to get things done. Do we always get things done? And so it's important to demonstrate to them what it looks like to actually put things into place and actually bring action into the classroom and outside of it, because we are supposed to be showing them what they're supposed to do. So if we're constantly saying, well, we're going to do this, but we never do this, what does that look like for them? And I'm always holding my students accountable. So accountability is so important for schools, and it's not to make you feel guilty, it's not to make you feel as though you've done things wrong, but it's important for you to recognize, actually, we haven't done this. Let's start to move towards that and engage a wide range of stakeholders. It's not just the teachers that should be involved in this work, it's pastoral leaders, it's head of years, it's teaching assistants. It's not just got to do with the people who are delivering the curriculum. Everyone is involved in this. Get parents involved. Parents can't sometimes see the bigger picture, especially, unfortunately, if you're in a part of the UK that's predominantly white and you are trying to engage your students in a conversation that the parents might not be receptive to. Engage them in this conversation, because it isn't just the work of within school, but it's community. So it's outside of school as well.
Brilliant advice. Thank you, Rhia, so much for joining us and for all the work you do in school and out of school in driving the conversations forward. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you so much. Take care.